soon as people see green and sustainable, they get nervous. They think that there will be a trade-off either in terms of the user experience, or they'll be asked to earn a less competitive financial return.
Hi, I'm Ryan Bromley, a partner at Good Innovation and a big believer in the power of organisations to become a force for good. In this episode, I chat to Tom Mason from Shoal and Marten Möller from Algbra about a savings proposition that supports a global portfolio of sustainable projects. Our conversation focuses on consumer perceptions of products with green credentials and how this sometimes leads to questions about the credibility and quality they provide. It's fascinating to hear from them both about what their consumer research told them, on what customers understood about where their current savings go, what they really wanted from a sustainable finance product, and how it shaped the product itself, the marketing and the brand. Shoal has big ambitions to change the way people think about their savings and how they can be aligned with their personal values. And they relish the challenge of instigating a virtuous race, one where banks are competing not just on interest rates, but on what is being funded and the impact those funds are creating. I hope you enjoy it, and as always, would love to hear from you what you think, so please drop me a line with any questions or thoughts. A nice easy question to start with. It'd be really good just to hear a bit more about you. Tell us about you, your background and your roles. Whoever wants to go first.
I'll go first?
Yeah.
So I'm Tom Mason. I originally trained as a solicitor here in London. Then I moved into finance. I worked for a big British bank called Standard Chartered for just over a decade. And then for the last 4 years, I've been working on a sustainable savings proposition called Shoal, which we built with the help from Martin and the team at Algbra, and are aiming to launch it later this year.
And I'm Martin. I joined Algebra as part of the founding team over 3 years ago now. I joined, I guess, in any startup, it's that kind of T-shaped interdepartmental position who just does a little bit of everything, but with a focus on building out the impact side. So that's what I continue to do now, as well as some partnership stuff and still touching on various. But the thing is, I think with a values-driven company, that impact piece is just by nature quite interdepartmental. It's not siloed in terms of here's your impact or sustainability or ESG department. It's much more porous.
Yeah, embedded. And Tom, tell me, what made you make that jump from big bank to something like this?
It was the opportunity to build something new, I think. A decade at the bank, I was the group chief of staff for 5 years, so I worked directly for the CEO. Standard Chartered is one of those banks, people have seen the name, I think. They sponsor Liverpool. The headquarters is in London, but the business is all in Asia, Africa and the Middle East. And working with the CEO, I travelled to 35 or 40 countries and saw what the bank does and where they do it. And what struck me was there's a huge amount of innovation and green and sustainable work going on and projects and companies being supported. But the bank is 170 and it's in a lot of emerging markets. So there's a lot of conventional finance as well. There's energy and there's extractive industries. And what we tried to build with Shoal was a product where people could choose which part of the portfolio their money supports while it's on deposit.
Nice. So that leads me nicely to my next question about Shoal. We're here to talk about it. It's an exciting, soon to be launched new product. Can you tell us a bit more about it? What does it do and what does it do for the consumer?
Yeah, absolutely. So at its heart, it's a standard savings proposition. It's fixed term deposits. We ask people to place money with Shoal for a fixed term. We start at 7 days, but you can also secure your money for 1 month, 3 months, 6 months or 12 months. And what you get in return is a strong rate of interest. We're paying just a shade under 5% at the moment, so we're at the top of the tables in terms of the financial element of this. You get security, you get FSCS protection and everything else you would expect from a standard high street savings account. But the interesting bit, as I touched upon, is that while your money's on deposit, it's used exclusively to support Standard Chartered Bank's green and sustainable finance portfolio. So for the consumer, I guess what we offer is security, good UX, certainty around the fact that their money is safe and they're getting it back at a certain time when they expect it and the amount that they expect, but also the opportunity while it's earning that return to support some really special projects and companies. And the way we've designed the app, I say we, the way Martin and his team have designed and built the app allows you to get real insight into what some of those projects and companies are.
Yeah, for me, I think those projects are the really exciting part. I think we can get onto this a little bit later, but when you speak about sustainability, a lot of it is just words, but the underlying assets of this portfolio is really interesting. So one 85% are based in emerging markets, which is where sustainable finance is most needed. And to give you some examples of what these projects are, it's educational opportunities for marginalized communities in India, it's the first high-speed electric rail in Egypt, it's battery storage in the Philippines, it's so on and so forth. So it's a really diverse list of projects that you can help support. And one thing I find really exciting about Shoal from a consumer experience perspective is that it just breaks down those barriers to entry. It's just, when you talk about finance, people are really kind of standoffish. And especially sustainable finance, because of all the rhetoric and all the jargon and so on and so forth. And it's been the reserve of more institutional or experienced investors. Whereas with Shoal, another point is that you can start saving with £1. And it's just making that whole experience impactful and rewarding. Mm-hmm. I think that's what makes Shoal really special to me.
Yeah, I think that's right. We don't want sustainability to be an exclusive club. You shouldn't have to be wealthy. You shouldn't need a financial advisor. You should be able to open an account with a small amount of money and still make a contribution. And you should know that your money's safe as well. You shouldn't have to take a higher degree of risk than someone who saves with one of the high street banks. You should know that your money's properly protected. So that's very much what we've tried to build. And as Martin says, keep it simple. You know when you get your money back, you know how much you get back, and you can see the portfolio in terms of what it's supporting. You can have as much or as little detail as you want. And what we found with a lot of customers was they don't want a great deal of detail, actually. One of the journeys we've been on in terms of the design of the app is sort of not partitioning, but scaling down the green and sustainable presentational elements in the main app. It looks and feels like a Starling or a Monzo. It's a finance app first and foremost. And then we have the impact section for those who are keen to learn more, or just at a part of their day where they can afford to spend a bit more time learning more rather than focusing on their finances. So separating those two out a little bit more was one of the main bits of customer feedback that we received.
And that impact section as well. So as we mentioned, you help support a lot of the sustainable development goals through this portfolio and the projects in and of themselves, but then we also have other more kind of gamified features which appear in that impact space, which is sort of the carbon you help avoid and the clean water you help generate through your savings. One thing is that people are not really aware, especially the general consumer, even people in the payments industry. I was at an event speaking yesterday and they were kind of unaware still of what banks do with their money. 80% I think of UK savers have no idea, but they obviously invest this money, and it's often industries that are not maybe aligned with your values. So that can include things like fossil fuels. And Shoal, not only does it not invest there, but also by the projects that it does invest in, there's that carbon avoidance that happens by supporting certain renewable energy projects or clean water generation, and that's quite nice to see as a customer.
Yeah. And it seems like such a simple idea when you listen to you both talk about it. You mentioned it's been 4 years in the making. I'm interested, where did the idea for Shoal come from? What was the original sort of catalyst to make it happen?
So it was a colleague of mine at Standard Chartered. We were in Singapore for a work event, and we'd been invited to that because we'd been promoted recently, so we'd also had pay rises. And my colleague and co-founder Joan was looking for somewhere to put that pay rise money that had some sort of positive impact for society and the environment, but was also safe, did also make a return, and couldn't really find it. And given that we were now in relatively senior positions at an emerging markets bank, that felt like a problem we could probably team up and try to solve. And we were fortunate because at Standard Chartered there's an in-house innovation incubator called SC Ventures. And they run it broadly along the lines of Dragon's Den. You go along and you pitch your idea, and if they think it's a good idea, they give you a small amount of money. In our case, I think they gave us about $50,000, which we spent. Sorry, that's not a terribly small amount of money, but in the context of building a new savings proposition for the UK, it is. And we spent half on consumer research just to prove that people really would want this thing, and half on legal and compliance research, not to get the answers, but just to get some reassurance that with a fair wind and some time spent on the various problems, it was something that we could build and launch. And then for the next 3 years, it was continuing to iterate and build. You need a lot to launch a new digital proposition. You need developers to build the app itself. You need marketing, you need design, you need onboarding, and everything has to be done to a standard that meets a major bank's risk appetite. And candidly, we worked with quite a few different providers. Many of them were very good, but it took a long time to pull the app together and get it working. And what we ended up with after 3 years was an app that was good enough. It was solid and it did what we wanted it to do, and we were getting ready to launch. And then we met Martin and the team at Algebra, and obviously they're in the tech business, they build apps, and we said, oh well, get a load of this. And they didn't hold their noses, but they said, look, the product is great and the concept is great. The execution, you can tell it's taken you 3 years and lots of different people have worked on it. Just give us 4 months and a clean sheet of paper. We won't even repair what you've got here. We'll just place it to one side and we'll build you something from scratch that delivers the same thing but better. And that was 4 months ago. So they've delivered on that promise. I have Shoal. My mum now has Shoal, which has been a key ambition. And I think we're about 3 weeks away from being on the App Store and it being available to everyone. So it's a real thrill. And it's been some time in the making, but we hope it'll be worth it because we think we've got the design exactly right now.
I think also maybe worth mentioning that at the moment we'll be launching as a savings product, but the ambitions of Shoal, I think from the get-go, and those continue to be much greater than just developing a savings
because I
product.
think the problem that we're solving for doesn't just sit with savings. We can do something special with savings because we have access to this portfolio, but insurance, pensions, mortgages, all of these have the potential, I think, to have a really strong green and sustainable version. So over time we'd like to broaden Shoal out to become a marketplace, almost like a money supermarket where you go to find the very best that's available, but with sustainability at the core of each proposition. It wouldn't be on the Shoal platform unless it also hit the mark in terms of sustainability.
Yeah. And you mentioned you spent some of that first 50k on consumer research, which leads me nicely, I guess, to the topic that we're here to talk about today. So at our last event, we had David Croft, Head of Sustainability at Reckitt, who was talking about an example, I think from a previous job, but they produced a cleaning product that had green credentials. It talked about its green credentials, but they very quickly found that consumers perceived it as being less good as other things that were out on the market purely because of those green credentials. So it actually commercially didn't work for them as a product, which is a problem that we've heard quite a lot, this balance between promoting the green credentials of a product and consumers believing it to be of less sort of good quality as such. You mentioned Shoal's interest rate is as good as it gets, pretty much out there. So I'm really interested in your experience through doing that customer research, through building Shoal, how you found this problem and how you've navigated it. Martin, you mentioned some of the stuff is sort of to the side and it's there if people have a bit more time, but tell us a bit more about how you found that problem from a consumer perspective and what you've done to overcome it.
So it's interesting. I mean, I've absolutely experienced what you're describing, which is as soon as people see green and sustainable, they get nervous. They think that there will be a trade-off either in terms of the user experience or they'll be asked to earn a less competitive financial return when their finances are linked to sustainability, which is something we've worked very hard to move away from. We've kept the product very simple, and as I say, we've somewhat partitioned the finance element from the impact, even though they're completely interrelated. We just want to be sure people know that there isn't that trade-off. They're getting the best of every possible world in terms of UX, return, and impact. But it's, you know, when you talk about that nervousness around the green option, I have heard the opposite as well. I've got a friend who's reasonably senior at Rentokil, pest control, and he says they're increasingly hearing clients getting nervous about, he said back in the day people used to say, you know, they had a rat infestation, I don't care what you do, just nuke them, just get them out of my building. Whereas now he's hearing increasingly from clients, you know, it's not bad, is it, what you're putting down there? And he says, well, I mean, it's bad if you're a rat, it's fatal. But they're nervous about the environmental impact of those products, even though the purpose of them is actually, you know, much darker. And I think what I take from those two strands is that people want to get the job done, but ideally they'd like to do it in a way that is green and sustainable. Whichever side they're viewing it from, it has to do both, otherwise it won't fly. So I think that's what we're aiming to do with the Shoal proposition.
Yeah, I think financial services might also be a bit of an anomaly in terms of how sometimes people did have a little bit more hesitancy maybe to adopt sustainable finance products as they would buying an organic yogurt, for example. That consumers generally are very willing to consume more consciously, and if you're buying an organic yogurt, that might be, you know, a few p more, and we also know that people are willing to pay a sustainability premium. But when it comes to financial services, consumers can get very, very nervous. So it's an interesting challenge, and I think the other huge challenge here is people are more aware of the positive or negative impacts of how raw materials might be produced or something. Like, you know, how your t-shirts are sourced and if they're ethically produced and so on and so forth. But there is that massive gap in the public knowledge of what financial services do. So I think we've got that kind of double whammy where we have to first educate also the public on why this decision is important. And it's probably the most important decision you can make. Make Our Money Matter would say it's 21 times more impactful to green your pension than to do all the usual sustainability stuff. It's one, and also for small businesses, right? To green your pensions and your bank accounts is again one of the most impactful things you can do to reduce your carbon footprint. But that knowledge is not really at the forefront of people's minds. So first is this educational piece, and then it's convincing them that through products like Shoal, where you're not requiring people to compromise on price or quality, that it's a win-win. And when you guys first came through, the messaging, or one of the taglines was good for the world, good for your wallet. Within a day, I think we went to good for your wallet, good for the world. And now I think we're not even really referring to that much in the sorts of communications that we're doing. We're seeing that world piece just falling a little bit further behind, and we're really letting the product speak for itself, and, you know, sharing things around the assets that are underlying that product rather than speaking about these things.
Yeah, and I think the education piece is a really interesting one because it's a massive opportunity, and if you get the marketing and the descriptors right, it's something very exciting. I kind of blame Hollywood, I think, because people, I mean, how banks work isn't a very interesting topic. Robbing banks is a very interesting topic. So people tend to believe that what banks provide is custody. There's a big vault and it's full of gold and somebody guards it. So when we show consumers Shoal and say, look, you know, your money will be invested to support these projects and companies by the bank that is holding it, they say, whoa, high risk, you know, I don't want my money to do that, I want my money to be safe. And you say, well, that's what Barclays and NatWest and Lloyds and Santander and everybody else does. And then they go, oh. And then you say, so wouldn't it be nice, by extension, if you had some insight into or control over what they do while they're getting your interest? And then it's a real breakthrough moment, and you know, you get some enthusiasm there. So if we get that piece right, I think there's a real excitement that hasn't been tapped into yet. I think savings has always really been, you know, the banks compete with each other on rate and nothing else. But if we can get that sense that what the bank does with your money is kind of in your hands as well, or give people the option to vote by moving their money, you can create a really interesting competitive dynamic between the banks, because suddenly it's not just rate, it's what are you guys funding. So we're hoping Shoal will be the catalyst for something much bigger in the industry as well.
And creating that change. And I'm really interested in, this education piece feels really important. If you sit here like we are having a discussion about it, you've got the opportunity to explain it, tell the story, but with the average consumer you don't have that opportunity. So how much are you leaning into that challenge of trying to educate people back, I guess, to this question around what they really want is the best interest rate, and the rest of it they don't really think about.
Yeah.
So how do you do that?
I would say we're leaning in thoroughly, but very carefully, because there are a few different risks here. One is we don't want to set out to bash the legacy banks. You know, we work with a legacy bank who does conventional as well as sustainable finance, and part of being a legacy bank is the responsibility for transition. So you help your existing clients become greener. We've got no problem with transition finance whatsoever. You know, I think it's really, really, really important work, and what Standard Chartered are doing in that field is great. So Shoal is something where you can only support green and sustainable finance, but that's not to denigrate what the old banks do. So that messaging, I think, needs to be quite nuanced and quite balanced. Then you've got greenwashing risk. I think you need to be very clear about exactly how the money is used, how much impact it has. If you overstate that, A, you'll get in trouble, quite rightly, for misrepresentation, and B, you'll lose everybody's confidence and trust. I think, you know, it's worse to promise something and not deliver it than never to claim to do it in the first place. And then the third piece is people value rate, I think, very, very highly. They're also busy. They don't want to open their banking app and be hit with a lot of statistics and facts every time. I think, as I mentioned earlier, we should have that information there for those who want to dig into it. But first and foremost, what people want is rate, security, and an intuitive, high-quality user experience. At the back of their minds, knowing that their money is also doing great things in emerging markets is fantastic, but that's where it belongs for most of the time. It's not going to be the thing that hits you in the face every time you open the app. And that's something I had to sort of learn and come to terms with, to be honest. When we first designed and built Shoal, it was much more involved in the sense that you could save by theme. So it was, I would like to put in £500 for 3 months and have it support clean water, and then I'll put in £1,000 for a year on solar power. And people said, look, this is homework. You know, I just want my money to be doing good things and to be safe. I don't want to work out which is better between water and solar and wind. Leave me out of it, guys. So we had to scale that back and radically simplify. But ultimately what we've got, I think, is a better app and a better user experience for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with all those points. But collaboration, firstly, it's core to our business model at Algebra Labs as well. And, you know, we are definitely not going to get this done by ourselves. And by leveraging each other's strengths, legacy banks, fintechs, we can achieve so much more. And then when it comes to the branding, the marketing side, in addition to all the greenwashing risks and so on that arise, you always have to substantiate your claims too. And that makes for really boring branding, typically. That's what we found. So the marketing team or branding team will say one thing, you go to legal compliance, is that even though this might be true, you have to substantiate it within the same post. Mm-hmm. And that just makes it horrible. So I think one way of also just circumnavigating that again is just focusing on what we do rather than saying how we showing how we do things rather than saying what we do. So I think, and we're still at the beginning here, so I guess we're still going to experiment a little bit, but my guess is that by focusing on showcasing the sort of impact that you can have.
Yeah, let the projects and companies speak for themselves. I think that's right. Because the other thing about the legal and compliance issues, I think paradoxically they can erode trust. Because if you say we're doing good things with your money, and then there's a yard of tiny print, you think, are you? I'm probably not going to read all of that, but it feels like it wouldn't be there if you really were as reputable and trustworthy as you're claiming to be. So again, I think you're right, keep it simple, keep it fact-based, and just show people rather than try and describe it too much.
The other piece as well is that I think through messaging, if you're only speaking about the sustainability aspect too, you're preaching more to the choir, you're going to those you probably are going to whenever anyway, and something like Shoal, the goal is very much to mainstream sustainable finance, to make it for everyone. We joke, your climate change denied uncle, whoever it might be, should want to download Shoal because they love the experience and the returns are good and so on and so forth. That I think is a major objective that we should be taking as an industry more broadly, is how do we get everyone on board?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, we touched on it earlier, but one of the reasons it's taken 3 or 4 years, partly the technical challenges and just the logistical difficulties of moving a big project through a major bank, but also the key pillars, each of which were really hard to get, that were important to us. So low barriers to entry, you shouldn't need more than £1 to open an account with Shoal. FSCS protection, your money's got to be safe, and then the impact piece as well. Getting all 3 of those and getting them to run concurrently is part of what's been difficult.
I'm interested in this point around mainstreaming, because something I hear a lot from other businesses that I talk to is, oh, this is just for young people. This stuff is for the next generation of consumer. It's when my teenagers grow up and get bank accounts and that type of stuff. And how much have you found in what you've been doing and the research you've been doing that either validates or sort of debunks the myth that it's not for consumers in the here and now? Because if that were true, I guess your ambition of mainstreaming is going to be really difficult. But what have you found?
So, I mean, we love young people and we definitely want them as customers. What I would say is they tend to be less affluent than people. I mean, I don't want to put numbers on this and start calling people not young, but as you move into your mid-30s and beyond, you do have more money to save. And that tends to be when you're saving more thoroughly. I mean, in London, I think everything moves out by 5 years because everything's so wildly expensive. But cars, weddings, mortgages, that demographic, I think, has lived climate change during their lifetime. They've seen, since sort of the early 80s onwards, they have seen the world change. And they've seen the weather change and they've experienced it. So they are concerned, they are socially aware, they do want to do the right thing. But they're also at a time in their lives where they're saving really substantial amounts. So I'd say our sweet spot, actually, is a little bit older. The great thing about young people is they are curious and they are interested in alternatives. They don't really like or trust the mainstream banks, and we do hope they will look at Shoal and they'll still be with us as they move through those life stages. And they're also much more comfortable with new apps as well. I think there's a trust piece when you launch a new financial services app and say, lend us your savings for a fixed period, we will give them back. Young people are much more familiar with digital only. I think if we had high street branches, we'd find it easier to win the confidence of that older demographic, but that's not something we're going to do. So what we've tended to see in our test periods is that people, especially older people, will put a small amount in for the 7-day period, and then when it comes back safely, they'll lump in and put in something much more substantial, which is fine, but yeah.
Yeah, I think on the mainstreaming point, I think it's going to depend so much on how we continue to position the product in the market. Because we can very easily make it for a particular demographic, or you can try build the product and do the branding to appeal to a wider demographic. And ideally, we would have the latter. Research, I think, millennials are kind of a sweet spot because they have more finances available, and as Tom was mentioning, are more conscious of the climate crisis maybe than older generations. But then Gen Z and that age group, they are quite activist in their values, but as Tom was mentioning, they just don't have the finances really available right now.
One of the things I would say is if you march with Extinction Rebellion or Just Stop Oil, one of the inspiring things about them, I think, is that they are they are cross-generational, and every class is represented. They are really broad in terms of the people who share their concerns. So I think environment and sustainability is something that everybody cares about, or almost everybody, and I think earning a good return is something that everybody cares about. Nobody would deliberately take a lower return, and we saw that when we tested Shoal. We tested it with just a few hundred colleagues at Standard Chartered who are providing the sustainable finance portfolio, and we had the group chairman, the UK and Europe chairman on, but we also had people who were working in security and reception. It was across the bank, the appeal of it was there, which is something we find really reassuring as we get ready to launch it.
It's actually an interesting point. Yeah, maybe it's not even so much age, but it's just values split as well. And it's becoming less of a politicized topic in some ways, in other ways more. So when you look at the US and you see discussions on the energy sector, for example, if you speak solely about phasing out fossil fuels, it's a huge blue-red divide. Whereas then when you speak about energy sovereignty, that divide disappears and everyone's like, yeah, that sounds great. So in terms of mainstreaming, I think the language is important in terms of it's more of a values thing. You can be 80 years old and not care about it, and 20 years old and not care about it, or the other way around. But I think when you neutralize the language and not make it sound so much like this activist thing that's made for a very particular group of people, that choir, that really helps with the mainstreaming.
Especially if you couple it with, and this is our responsibility, but couple it with creating that excitement about the level of impact, because as we've talked about already, the impact of greening your finances is so much more material than some really worthwhile things, but that are much sort of higher effort, lower impact that people do every day. You're cycling to work or recycling, you're standing at the sink trying to rinse a peanut butter jar. It's a hassle, and it's definitely worth doing, but the relative impact is quite low, whereas moving your money, it takes moments, it's easy, there's really valuable financial returns, but also the impact of what it does while it's on deposit with a holder like Shoal is just an order of magnitude different.
And more of a carrot than a stick as well, isn't it? It's not, do this, do that, do that. As I said before, there's a great advert by Kia as well about how difficult it can be to be a sustainability warrior, but I mean it's a bit greenwashy. It's easy to drive like one and they've got this green car, but I think it's true. Often living sustainably requires a lot of dedication and a lot of compromise in your daily life choices, whereas moving your finances and getting rewarded for it and feeling good, and that can, I think, be quite a positive experience too. So it's not having that naggy someone kind of hitting you on your fingers, saying do this, do that.
And I'm really interested, lots of businesses we talk to are thinking about creating consumer-facing products and services that deliver on their sustainability and impact goals. And I'm talking about sort of heritage brands here that haven't historically done that. But they find it really hard. And Tom, I guess you've come from Standard Chartered and for 4 years you've been on this journey with Shoal. Thinking back over that 4 years and maybe with your Standard Chartered hat on a little bit, what advice would you give to people who are in these big heritage brands that are really thinking about creating these products and services to essentially make that happen and make that work for them?
It's a great question. So I think a few different strands I would follow up. One would be just keep at it. You know, it takes enormous determination to create something new or to drive change, and it's a multiple harder from within a big organisation. People aren't necessarily, I think, opposed, they're just apathetic. So moving something through and bringing people new work fundamentally to their desks, which they don't necessarily want, in order to achieve something that you think is worthwhile, as an individual within an organisation, I think is really, really important. So you just need to just maintain your determination and believe in what you're doing. And I guess that's equally true for an organisation as a whole, because at the top, whereas the leadership will feel equally strongly on this stuff, and I think they would probably share that sentiment. And then, as we've touched on a lot, I think make sure the value proposition is clear. Make sure that to the extent it's true, that you make it clear that there isn't this trade-off, that you are getting a great product that is also green, sustainable, impactful, whatever it may be. And then lastly, I think I would say make it easy for like-minded people to find you. So I noticed when I came to your offices, guys, that you're a B Corporation, as are Algebra, as is Shoal. That was one of the things that struck me about Algebra and made me sufficiently interested to start to explore working on Shoal with them, because as I've touched upon, I'd spent 3 years building an app. It did work, it was okay, but when I met a company that were in the same industry and had a much more innovative mindset and were obviously ethically aligned with me, and we had that in common, that is one of the things that made me really keen to explore it a bit more and think about it more carefully. So things like B Corporation status, I think, are a great way of advertising what you stand for.
Yeah. Very good advice. Martin?
Other points, maybe company culture, I think, is a really big one.
Yeah.
If you want to build a brand that kind of changes perceptions a little bit as to what you were before then it's important that your internal company culture reflects that too. Those can be two sides of the same coin, and you want to be hiring all that talent of that young people who care about these sorts of things too, and who breathe these things, because otherwise you can that's just how things happen in general, I think, right, in terms of the productivity in those areas where the ideas are coming from, and you'll start to feel that authenticity. So if you don't have that company culture behind it, it's going to be very difficult to do something meaningful. And I think one point where also just consider your strengths. So, I mean, in the Standard Chartered case, they have a huge balance sheet, a section of which is sustainable, and that's a huge advantage that they have that someone like an Algebra wouldn't have, for example. And generally, I think what we're seeing is a bit of I don't know if the right term is a regression to the mean, but you'll see startups who started with this huge value proposition and very values driven are now realizing that it's not enough just to have this thing that, we do the same but we do it sustainably. It needs to be a really, really good product. And what a lot of these larger institutions have is that they have often very good products. So focus also on the product piece and then see how you can start embedding those values, because the other half is going to have to play, whilst you're playing catch up on the values piece, the other half is playing catch up on the product. And going forwards, I don't think we're going to see situations in which people will expect anything other than high quality product that are impact driven. So I think that's slowly where we're going to get to with everything. So then you're probably heading in the product space or in your service, whereas lagging in that side. So yeah, I think that's a little piece of advice.
Yeah, look, and I'm really interested in this piece about culture, the culture of a business, because actually the next event is all about this. How do you embed impact into the DNA and culture of a business so that employees feel connected to the good that you do in the world, which is really hard. Even if you are B Corp, you're still coming into an office, you've still got the ups and downs of a job. How does that work at Shoal and Algebra? How much do you focus on embedding that culture deliberately so employees go home feeling like they do some good? Is it something that happens just because of what you do, or is it more deliberate at the same time?
I think it's very deliberate, isn't it? I mean, I think there are two strands to it. One is you have to invite your colleagues in to the discussion and hear from them and get their thoughts and opinions on how best to go about things and implement changes that they suggest, provided you think that they're strong. But also, I mean, Martin, I don't know why I'm answering this question because you do most of the work, but it's very strongly embedded into everything we do at Shoal and Algebra. We share a building at the moment, moment because we're working together very closely on building the app. And our B Corporation sign is front and centre, but when you go into our kitchen, for example, the 4 or 5 different recycling bins to really make sure we get it right and we minimise waste. And to the extent we do have waste that's non-recyclable, we bag it up and it's weighed every week, and we track where we are and we try and reduce, we try and keep the line going down rather than up. So it's a mixture of smaller and much bigger things. On the bigger side, I guess, for example, Algbra is a tech company. Their cloud architecture is all carbon neutral again, but it's about picking a provider whose values are aligned with your own, and just, I think, again, keeping the energy up, making sure you maintain that focus, and where you can, always picking the greener, more sustainable option.
Yeah, I think obviously it's important that the foundations are there, but then it is a very active thing. It's company culture, I think, is something that's really overlooked, and I've heard the term of like company culture asset managers. People should really be in charge of ensuring that the company culture is looked after, and it does require very active management. Otherwise, it's like water to fish. You're not really reflecting anymore on the question of what is our company culture, because things just tend to get normalized, and often, if you're not actively managing these things, it kind of can fall to, not in a bad way, but into like the louder minority, for example, and you begin having to depend on individual personalities and characters to drive the company culture, rather than it being something that is much more strategic. I think we've also gone through stages. I think in general it's very good, but then there's times where it's excellent, and then times where it's a little bit less excellent, and depends on sort of other company priorities, and it's just this constantly evolving thing. So company culture is not something that's static at all. It's always changing, and that's why it just does always require this active engagement.
Yeah. Final question. I'm just interested in what next for Shoal. I know you're just about to launch.
Yes.
So tell us, where can people find it, but also, what are your ambitions? What's the next 12 months, sort of 2 or 3 years look like? Where do you want to get to? You alluded to it being more than just a place for people to save and the marketplace, but what are your ambitions for Shoal?
No, absolutely. So first of all, shoalapp.com is where to find it. You can join our waitlist now, and we will write to you very, very soon when we're in the App Store and ready for people to download and get started. So please do visit shoalapp.com. Sorry to repeat it like a carnival barker. And in terms of ambitions, I guess there are a few different things. So there's a cultural ambition and a business ambition. On the business side, I would like to establish the savings proposition and get it sufficiently large in terms of client base and trust and profile that it does then make sense to work with other partners and expand into that fuller marketplace. So I would love to do green credit, loans and mortgages for people to either purchase electric vehicles or improve the energy efficiency of their homes or install a heat pump, that kind of thing, but just build Shoal out so that it is more than just the core savings proposition would be great. The other thing is, I think it would work in other countries. I think anywhere where people are digitally native and care about sustainability, and would like the opportunity to access and support a portfolio of projects and companies like the one Standard Chartered has, should be fertile ground for Shoal. So we will be looking at taking it on the road and going into other jurisdictions concurrently with growing out the UK proposition. Then culturally and bigger picture, I guess we've touched upon it already, but what I would love to do is just change the way people think about their savings. It's not just about return, it's still your money while the bank holds it, and the way they use it should be aligned with your values. And whether you save with Shoal or with another provider, that's something that you should demand. So if Shoal can be the catalyst for getting all of the major banks to have to serve that need, to hear from their customers saying, well, hang on, what are you doing with my money? It needs to be XYZ, or I will move it to a provider who I prefer, like Shoal, then that would be fantastic, because I think we're going to get out first because we built it, we're 3 weeks away, and there is nothing like Shoal out there at the moment. But I'm really looking forward to some healthy competition, because I hope the other banks will be forced to copy us, and then it's a kind of virtuous race to see who can be the most exciting, not just on rate, which is pretty flat, but on what's being funded, what's being done, how much impact is being created, because I think that'll be really interesting.
Tom, Martin, thank you so much. It's been really good talking to you. I'm really excited to see where you take Shoal and where it ends up, and encourage everyone to go and have a look.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.